Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me via Zoom is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. The United States, along with its allies, including New Zealand, has spent 20 years and $1 trillion trying to stabilise Afghanistan. It took just 10 days for the country to return to Taliban control. Welcome, Robert.
Morena, Bruce.
We've seen distressing scenes from what's happening in Afghanistan, and we're hearing conflicting reports of what the future of the country will be. Why have decades of occupation apparently failed so completely?
Well, that's a good question. Despite the sudden recapture of Afghanistan, this process was about 18 years in the making. It didn't come out of a clear blue sky. And I think you have to look across about 3 administrations before Joe Biden to get to the roots of the problem. The crucial turning point, in my view, Bruce, was the Bush administration's decision to expand what it called the War of Terror beyond Afghanistan. It should be recalled for our viewers that immediately after 9/11, the United States got UN authorization, the UN Security Council authorization, to launch a military operation into Afghanistan to root out Al-Qaeda training camps and also to remove the Taliban government who refused to hand over Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda leaders. But that process went reasonably well. But the turning point occurred when the Bush administration decided to expand its war on terror, as it called it, beyond Afghanistan into Iraq. It was a unilateral military operation in Iraq without the authorization of the UN. And as we know, the operation in Iraq didn't go according to plan. But more damagingly, because the United States became so preoccupied with its war in Iraq, it was actually an invasion, then an occupation, that meant that troops were directly transferred from Afghanistan to Iraq. It also meant the United States became, as I said before, very preoccupied with the situation in Iraq, and that gave the Taliban a chance to regroup and actually re-emerge as a potent fighting force by 2006. And since then, successive presidents have struggled with the problem of the Taliban.
Which version of the Taliban do you think we'll see ruling Afghanistan?
Well, that's a good question. I'm personally skeptical that this fundamentalist terror group who don't tolerate or brook defiance will necessarily change dramatically. But I think one of the challenges facing the Taliban is, yes, they have now won the long, more than 2 decade struggle now to control and take over Afghanistan, and they have prevailed, not least because the Afghan government, although generously supported, collapsed. They now have the challenge of running or ruling an Afghanistan which is very different from the one that they left in 2001. Women have now play a much greater role in Afghan society. They did, at least to the point where before the Taliban took over, much greater access to girls in education now in the intervening 2 decades. That's occurred. And although they've been flawed, there've been democratic elections. The 2 last elections were probably fraudulent, but you have got the idea that there should be a peaceful transfer of power in that society, planted in that society. So there's lots of changes there that won't be easy to reverse. And the Taliban said they're going to largely accept them. But, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it? And there are grounds to be skeptical because, as well as those statements from the Taliban, and let's be quite clear, the Taliban at the moment wants to consolidate power and probably is saying anything to help that process. The crucial thing was the test will come, excuse me, when the Taliban effectively have full control of the country, a process which will be, I think, by about the end of this month or early next month, when the evacuations of foreign citizens and diplomats are completed. and also those those Afghan nationals that have been associated with the international presence are also being airlifted. So we will soon know, but I'm skeptical whether the Taliban will fundamentally change its position. There are some disquieting signs, despite the rhetoric, that they haven't changed. And it's going to be an interesting situation to watch.
New Zealand had troops there for years. What does all of this mean for New Zealand?
Well, this is an interesting thing. Quite a few commentators, Bruce, have said it was one of our longest running deployments. We dispatched immediately after 9/11. We dispatched an SAS unit to the capital, Kabul. We also, by 2003, launched a contingent of 140 troops to assist with peace and reconstruction, peaceful reconstruction in the province of Baniyam, in the middle of the country. Both operations, both deployments were successful. There were one or two controversies. New Zealand was accused of handing over caught Taliban fighters and also Al-Qaeda operatives, accused of handing them over to the US. And the reason there was accusation arose because there was a suspicion that the US was not extending the Geneva Convention to some of these, what they called armed combatants. So there was a bit of controversy there, but overall, it was quite a successful 20-year commitment from our part. Some people are now saying, well, it was all for nothing. But I think that's a misreading of the situation, if I may say so. We didn't go into Afghanistan to do America's bidding. We went into Afghanistan because we recognized, rather Helen Clark, the Prime Minister of the day in September 2001, recognized that 9/11 was a threat to the international rules-based order which this country depends on. And another reason why we weren't simply doing America's bidding and that we had independent national interests for going was that we did not follow Australia and the UK into Iraq when the Bush administration decided to invade that country. So in a sense, one of the challenges we face now as a country is that the United States counterterrorism policy in Afghanistan has not really worked. There have been pocket success of the international presence in Afghanistan. I think New Zealand can be quite satisfied with its contribution. But I think what the whole events, the fall of Kabul in the last week show that it now falls to smaller states and middle powers, I think, to look past the United States. I think what we've witnessed is a relative decline of the United States' capacity to uphold the international rule of law in places like Afghanistan and elsewhere. And what these countries have to do now, New Zealand and like-minded democracies, we have to take more responsibility internationally to try to safeguard the international rules-based order, which the majority of countries depend on. I don't think we can rely on the United States in the way that perhaps we tended to believe we could in the past.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Noho ora mai.